What separates a good anime from a great anime? Why do some animes stick with us long after we've watched it? Welcome to The Workshop.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Kris.
We're two friends from high school and now aspiring writers. And in this podcast, we discuss and deconstruct storytelling elements in some of our favorite animes.
Today in The Workshop, we will be heading to Antarctica as we discuss the 2018 animated series A Place Further Than the Universe. This heartwarming story focuses on female friendship, an endearing, spirited quartet of high school girls, and a feel-good adventure that balances slice-of-life comedy, emotional drama, and stunning visuals.
So here is the summary. Mari Tamaki is a high school girl who wants to make the most out of her youth. Shirase Kabuchizawa has been working various jobs to save up so she can travel to the place where her mother disappeared 3 years ago. Hinata Miyake is a girl out of school seeking to leave her present situation before needing to hunker down for college entrance exams next year. And Yuzuki Shirashi is a child actress who feels trapped in her rigid life of celebrity responsibilities. Together, the four embark on a heartwarming but emotional journey to the place that's further than the universe, Antarctica!
Yay!
Awesome. So just to let everybody know, as always, our episodes will be full of spoilers of the entire show. However, we will be starting with our overall impressions. So hopefully we don't do any of the spoiling then. You can stick around for that segment and then go watch the show. Cool. So let's start with my overall impressions today. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm the one who recommended this show. I really liked watching it in my own free time. And so I was like, Kristen, are you up for a healing show? Because that's what they call this genre.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's called the healing genre. I think it's supposed to be like for your emotional health and well-being. But yeah, it's a lighthearted and generally comedic show. What I noticed about this show is that it has a very particular way of showing its comedic moments in a very simple and traditional way. It's nothing too complicated. So, for example, they have a lot of expressive characters and reactions, but something particular to this show is that they use very ironic setting elements. It's very simple but effective. So, for example, when Mari finds the 1 million yen in the envelope, she opens it in the train station. And then as soon as she opens it, she obviously has her like big reaction. Yeah. And then there's like the sound of a cash register in the background. And behind her is this like huge billboard that says, oh, like, you know, if you participate in this challenge, the award is 1 million yen. So it's kind of like ironic that she's finding the money and then also having this big poster behind her. Or one of my favorites is when they're in the washroom and Shirase like slams the door open and then on the bathroom stall is this sign that's like, please open doors quietly.
Oh, yeah.
It's very like simple, right? But it's effective, as I said. Yeah. So that's one of the first things that I noticed right off the bat about this show. It's a very simple, accessible, and lighthearted show for a lot of people. It's not too emotionally heavy until maybe towards the end.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that I noticed about this show is that it's interesting because we know where the girls are headed. We know that the girls are going to make it to Antarctica. It's not a mystery, right? Where they'll end up, who's going to end up there. But instead, I think the show wields its strongest weapon in the way that it makes the audience invest in the characters and genuinely care about the characters and the obstacles that come up in their relationship or in their journey to Antarctica. So that's why I think I'm going to say a lot throughout this episode today that this show is kind of like a case study for me on friendship, emotions that come out of friendships, characters' insecurities and fears. And I think that to wrap up my overall impressions, I just want to say that I think I, as an audience member, really resonated with this show on a personal level.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And an emotionally profound level. In part because the whole cast is girls, guys. Guys, like, let me tell you how exciting that is. The entire cast is female.
Yes.
So obviously that is a whole other barrier that has just been taken away. And also, I really like that the show delves into very nuanced emotions about life, especially when it's essentially a coming of age story. So about the emotions that teenagers or young adults might typically feel towards change, or instances where they have to step out of their comfort zone and being scared of that, but also having that taste for adventure and wanting to put yourself out there, the tension between those two. Or even like, for example, Hinata, who is so afraid of appearing emotionally weak in front of others. And so this entire story is kind of like her journey of spiritually and emotionally maturing to a place where she can really interact with her friends on a level that is effective and productive. And so I think that those lessons are really explored towards the later part when you're already really invested in the characters, but it executes it very well in the way that it hooks you onto the story first with its intrigue, and then it's like, bam, emotional trauma for you. Here you go. Tears. Oh, gosh. Those are my overall impressions. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, like, what else is there to say? Like, this is the definition of a feel-good, wholesome anime. And to be honest, at first, I was worried that the show would be too wholesome, in that I was worried going into it that it would lack significant conflict or emotional complexity.
I see.
I was worried that it wouldn't evolve character arcs in an interesting way. But by the end, I would say I was definitely very endeared enough to the characters that I did become invested in the core group of girls and their dynamic together, which is no small feat, no small writing feat, I should say. And from a writing perspective, I think the show did set out to do mainly a few things, and I think they did those things well, which is themes of found family with the focus on female friendship, which is amazing. The beauty of what it means to chase a dream, whatever it may be, and exploration of grief, I think, is a big thing. I feel like it manages to be emotional in the right moments and comedic in the right moments. And I actually found myself crying like every other episode, which is saying something, I think, because I don't cry that easily when I watch things. So there's definitely something to be said when a story is able to shape moments like that effectively. I also want to touch upon the genre of the show, because from a genre perspective, I think the show is definitely an adventure story, and it definitely leans into slice of life vibes as well. But I also think it's interesting to consider how much the show really fits into that typical slice of life mold, because on the surface there are moments that can seem unrealistic if you take them at face value. Especially like how everything comes together in the beginning. Like, it's almost this comical series of events that brings these four strangers together, and you might be thinking, like, why would these teenagers really be allowed to go on an expedition to the Arctic?
Right?
That supposed lack of realism can take away from someone's enjoyment of the show. Not me, just saying some people, because I think that is a criticism that I saw being leveled against the show. But fair. My counter argument to that is that the show is definitely aware of that, and I think it calls that out by having characters even acknowledge in world that the goal to go to Antarctica seems very unattainable. And so on that topic, I think you almost have to look at writer intention, because to me, this show, it doesn't completely discredit the realism and the logistics of the journey. Like, you do see them go through that, but also it doesn't want you to focus on the realism of high schoolers going to Antarctica, but instead focus on the feeling in and of itself of wanting something more than what your life is, and the yearning that comes with that, and the struggle of people judging you. I think what this show really does best is that it just touches upon the sense of wonder and awe and conviction, and it's almost like Antarctica is just this show's placeholder or symbol of whatever someone's goals are, whatever your own goals are as a viewer, and whatever we feel like our life journey is. And the feeling of being propelled forward by that simple sense of wonder is valid.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's what the show is really going for, or at least that's how I connected with it. Seeing these characters gradually reckon with whatever they're going through, their own sadness, their own vulnerabilities, and their own insecurities. I like that the show makes use of nature as this beautiful and dangerous force, and just that theme of like the vastness of the universe and stuff. And lastly, of course, I just have to say this: the show is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
I think Madhouse, the animation studio, went above and beyond with this show. The animation plays super well with light and water, and it's really able to capture that sense of wonder that the characters themselves are feeling. The show has a female director, which is just a nice little detail, and it was a fun show to watch for sure.
I want to piggyback off of what you said about author intention, because I
Yes.
think it transitions really well into, so basically we'll be talking about this show in chronological order as always.
Yeah.
I think it transitions really well into what I took from the first episode, because it's very intentional with the first episode. Even starts off by, Kimari with this analogy of water stagnating in pools, and seeing that kinetic energy of the water being breaking free from its confines. I think that if you were to ask the author what the purpose of this show was, I feel like the writer would say that they wrote it to serve as an inspiration, maybe to people who were too afraid of breaking out of the mold of everyday life. And that is really the core theme that they establish in the first episode. And we can see Kimari as being this girl who has that taste for adventure. Like, she wants to go after something more than her everyday life, but she just needs that call to adventure first. And for her, it comes in the form of Shirase, which is like so cute. But also, I think that contrasting Kimari in the first episode with her friend Megumi was important.
Yes.
Because I think that they touch in the first episode on what it means to quote unquote have done or accomplished something in life. And for some people, I feel like it's okay to just have stayed in the same place. Like, some people are okay with comfort and just having stability, I think that's something a lot of people seek. But people like Kimari who just have that taste for adventure but are scared. The idea that people like that who are scared of change will find any excuse. They'll find any small inconvenience or hindrance to stop them from breaking the status quo. And or like when she's talking to Megumi and they're saying, "Oh, but what if like a plane crashes? Like, what if a Shinkansen explodes?"
Yeah.
Like,
Honestly,
I was laughing.
Relatable.
Because that's technically true.
Yeah.
Like,
What
a
if?
Shinkansen could explode.
Yeah, what if?
But there's always going to be risk with anything that comes in life. So
Yeah.
I like that they established right off the bat in the first episode what is Mari's deal.
Yes.
And also
Yeah.
what the main theme of at least the beginning of the show is going to be.
I feel like the way that they are able to kind of create these like feelings that feel quite profound, even in very simple everyday things, like something just as simple as taking the train in the opposite direction, you know, and how that can feel like your first step towards an adventure. Because like just because it's a small thing, just because it's not, I'm not boarding a plane to Antarctica right away, it's still significant. So I just really related to that. I also liked that I feel like there's a common theme in anime where you have, so because Shirase and Kimari, we meet them in this episode and they're quite opposite, right? Like Kimari is like this outgoing, bubbly character and Shirase is like quite serious. So I think it's really funny just the way that their characters play off of each other, but also I feel like a lot of the times in anime, you have the main character being like Kimari is a bubbly main character, but usually it's the main character who has this like really strong sense of conviction,
Right.
and then it's like a secondary character that gets inspired by that conviction. But in this show, it's kind of the opposite. Like Kimari is technically our main character, and she's the one that gets inspired by Shirase's conviction, because Kimari, the episode starts off and we see that Kimari has this bucket list that she wants to like, you know, go on an adventure, and she feels like her youth is like expiring, even though she's literally in high
like
school.
16.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, calm down.
Nervously.
Laughs nervously. But it's like a very vague goal, right? Like to put on your bucket list, go on an adventure is quite vague. And so to contrast that with someone like Shirase, who is literally like, I'm going to Antarctica and I literally have the money for it, is like kind of impressive. And it's kind of an interesting contrast.
But I would argue that Shirase is really the main protagonist, because even if we talk about the ending, she's the one who gives the final speech during their departure. She's the one who has most of the screen time in the grand finale of the show. So I would say that Shirase is the main protagonist, but we're able to live through those experiences alongside Kimari, because I think that she's the easier person to relate to. She's almost like the canvas character that you can just put yourself. Maybe I'm saying this as like a bubbly person myself, but I feel like she's the canvas character that we can put ourselves into. And it's almost like Gatsby-esque in that way, because I know this is a reach.
What?
Because we get the main storyteller, Nick, who
I
is
see what you
telling
mean.
this story about I'm sorry.
I was not expecting this. Oh my god.
We're having a visceral reaction because Gatsby is like...
It
has a special place in our hearts.
Yeah. Kimari is Nick Carraway, yeah.
Yeah, Kimari is Nick. Shirase is Gatsby. Tell me you don't see it. Shall we talk about the next episode, episode 2? Mm-hmm. This is the one where they meet Hinata for the first time.
Oh, yes. So Hinata, when she was introduced, at first, because I knew that they were setting up this ensemble cast vibe, or at least this quartet, and I was interested to see how they would have the personalities play off of each other, because I think when Hinata first comes in, I'm like, oh, she's just like Kimari. Like, she's outgoing, she's bubbly, she just has this like cutesy optimism to her. So at first I was like, how is she going to differ from Hinata?
There can only be one.
There can only be one. No, I was worried that there wouldn't be enough like interesting overlap and like what the dynamic would be. But by the end of it, I was quite impressed to see how Hinata's character does like differentiate from all the other girls.
Because she's arguably very different from girls her age, right? Namely, she's not in school. Yeah. And we discover later that she has all of this past relational trauma. And so it feels like there is a good reason for her to be the smartest or the wisest one out of all of them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that because she is wiser, more logical in her thinking, and she's more like, she has higher IQ, her EQ is lower, right? Like she has more problems that come up because of her pride and her ego, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later. But yeah, it's an interesting way of shaping her character.
So the next episode 3, we meet Yuzuki, who is our last girl, best girl. Our last best girl, because they're all best girl.
Yeah.
Before we talk about Yuzuki specifically, I want to talk about how, I guess this is more of a cinematography thing that I noticed in this episode, where there's this shot that the show keeps reusing, the same shot of Kimari and Megumi sitting at their desks at school.
Oh,
if you notice, every time they cut to that shot in the classroom, it always cuts in the exact same angle. It's this side angle,
side profile, yeah.
And I think the repetition of that almost emphasizes like the monotony, or like maybe not the monotony, but like the very like ordinariness of their high school life,
blandness.
Yeah, and so it like, I think if it's a shot that is very purposefully like shot to feel less dynamic and less exciting than the rest of the scenes in the show.
So Yuzuki is the last addition to the quartet. She is a child actress, who is compelled to go to Antarctica by her manager, Mom. She doesn't want to go because she has a hard time making friends because of her social status as a celebrity who always has to like move around a lot. So it's just so heartwarming, this notion of Yuzu finding friends for the first time. Like, I think that most people don't understand that it's such a luxury to have friends to travel with and to, you know, people to vibe with. And so I just felt really happy for her. And I like that she has this phrase that she always says throughout the episode. She always says, I could just die right now, right? Yeah. And I like that at the beginning of the episode, she always says it, but it's coming from a place of absolute dissatisfaction about her life. Like, she's like, oh, I could die right now. But I like that by the end of the episode, she's still saying the same thing, but it's out of contentment. Like, I'm so happy I could die right now. Maybe not to that extent. But, you know, along the lines of now she's in a place in her life where she finally sees a direction, an emotional direction that she can go towards.
And she does try to make friends. It's not like she's out here, like, sulking in a corner. Like, she has tried, but her classmates are clout chasers. And I do think that there is something to be said about, like, what kids go through when they're put in a spotlight at an early age. So we do get a sliver of that from her, for sure. I think it was really endearing as well when Yuzuki, like, after she meets them, I think it's maybe their second time talking to her, and she thinks that the three of them are, like, best friends who've known each other for years. And I thought that was really endearing because it kind of goes into that theme of, like, how much a shared goal or a shared interest can bring people together regardless of time.
Because I think that it's not just amongst the four of them, but we see later how these four characters are paralleled by the adults of the expedition. And one of the things that I questioned about this show is, like, how can these kids and these adults get along so well? You know, like, you gotta have some kind of generational disconnect. There has to be. But they're, like, best friends. I think there is something to be said about connecting people despite age difference because they have that same goal, and the adults too are working against all of these pressures and, like, negative rhetoric, and trying to get to the same place that these girls are getting. So yeah, there is kind of the aspect of, Antarctica unites us all together. Hooray. Kumbaya, you know? So
I like that the writers don't, like, hammer that theme, like, or, like, shove it up our noses, like, right in the beginning. Because I think it does come in at the end, and it does tie into that eventually, that whole idea of, like, what Antarctica means and what it represents. But they build up to it gradually, instead of, like, literally having it be this, like, symbol that like the characters are constantly yelling about and being like, Antarctica is my dream every single episode. It's a little bit more subtle than that, which I appreciated.
I agree.
Okay, we can move on to episode 4.
Okay.
I just think the scene where Kimari is observing her mom in the kitchen
oh my gosh.
before deciding whether or not it's a good day to ask for her permission to go on this trip. I was like,
gold.
That is so funny. Because, like, haven't we all done that as kids? Where you're like, is my mom in a good mood today? Can I give her this permission slip today? I just thought it was hilarious. So this is the episode where we meet the, I guess, captain, the leader of this civilian expedition.
Oh, yeah.
So her name's Toto, and she is so
hot.
Yeah. I was like, we have to leave that for dumpster fire.
I said it, sorry.
Yeah, no, you said it. She is, like, she's just got, like, such energy. I was like,
she's just got boss energy.
She got boss
lady
energy.
Yeah, she does.
She could slap my face and I would thank her. So anyways, we're introduced to her. We're introduced to Toto, and it's quite clear that Shirase knows her. There's some tension there. There's some history there.
Yeah, I have a lot of things to say about Toto. Because I think that she is a very symbolic character. I think that as soon as we get to know her in the show, we automatically are entrenched in the plot thread of Shirase's mother. And I would say that, like how Shirase is trying to deny her mother's death the entire show, the show also tries to stay, you know, not get too close to the grief aspect until the end. And so whenever we see Todo, we get introduced to her, or we get a very heavy moment between her and Shirase, for example, it always has to do with that very dark plot thread. And as I said at the beginning, this show is very hopeful and lighthearted, except for this one thread. Even the makeup of Toto's character aesthetic. Like, she's a very long, dark figure with long black hair, and she's very somber looking. And so whenever she's on screen, it's not like she brings it down, because she does also have this like optimism to her, but it's almost like this reminder that there's something dark in the back of the story, you know? Next, I want to talk about Megumi, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about episode 5. This was a great episode.
This was a great episode.
Loved this episode.
Yeah. Megumi and Mari are best friends. And the show really goes to a lot of lengths to paint Mari as this aspirational character, right? As we said, she's always trying her best to work the hardest that she possibly can at everything. So they really use Megumi as a character foil to be the more cynical, the more realistic one. And I like that the show takes time to reconcile these present relationships before they have Kimari moving on to her next adventure. Kimari is this uncertain girl with low self-esteem. She's always clinging to Megumi, and Megumi kind of like feeds off of that because, I don't know, I guess it makes her feel
valued.
Makes her feel like she has worth. Yeah. So to see Kimari going off and becoming her own person, becoming more confident, her sense of stability is destabilized. Essentially.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I like this term that you coined last episode, between Bakugo and Deku.
Oh, God.
I like that you called it a relationship of contradiction.
Oh, yes.
Because that's kind of like what they're going for with this relationship, right? And then at the very end, I like that Megumi was like, I want to break up with you.
Oh, yeah.
Because for her, that was her way of emotionally liberating herself from this relationship and this reliance on Kimari. I don't know if I would call it a toxic maybe it could be considered toxic, but this show is like all about catharsis, right? Moving physically and having a change of surrounding, or moving from one relationship to another, or moving out of a relationship to an independent individual, you know?
I definitely related to like Megumi's, like, even just like the way that she tries to like just be so stoic about it. Everyone is so afraid to like come across as too clingy in romantic relationships and friendships, but in the aftermath of that, these kinds of things do happen. These misunderstandings happen. And I wouldn't call their friendship toxic, because they are teenagers who are just like, you know, they do. They're just trying to figure out their emotions. But I would say like it does show what the consequences of what can happen if we don't talk about how we're feeling. If we don't, like, if we assume that we understand like people's emotions without ever, without, you know, if we're too afraid to talk about our feelings and stuff like that. So like, even though what she did was like terrible, I still felt like so bad for her. And I still felt there was definitely a lesson to be learned for both of them by the end of it.
That's true.
So I think that their friendship was like, to me, the most relatable one in the show, like the one that I really, really resonated with. Not that I didn't love the quartet. I just appreciated that they took the time to like build something out of Megumi's character.
So on the topic of being vulnerable and how difficult it is, I think that this show does a good job of emphasizing how much more difficult it is to be vulnerable when you're in a relationship that's supposed to be good. So for example, I want to parallel it to the kind of situation between Shirase and Hinata later on. Like, that idea of losing your passport and then having that affect your friend, like that relationship is supposed to be good. But what happens when conflict comes up where it would be reasonable for the one person to be mad at the other person?
Yeah.
But you have to balance that with, well, forgiveness, but also guilt and also sympathy for the other person.
Speaking of the passport, that is the next episode.
That is
episode 6. So episode 6 is when the girls arrive in Singapore for a layover. The trip has technically started.
I love this.
They're not in Antarctica yet, but they're on their way. So yeah, the big conflict of this episode is that Hinata loses her passport, and obviously this is a huge problem for the trip because like so many things can go wrong. Obviously, you are entitled to feel like upset about that, but then also, isn't this person your friend? You have Hinata realizing that she lost it, and immediately all the other girls, Yuzuki and Kimari, are like, okay, this is what we'll do. We'll call the embassy, blah, blah, blah. We'll get our planes, like, we'll get our schedule fixed. Like, you have these two characters who are like, not the end of the world. Everything's fine, because they kind of have this emotional understanding that we just have to move forward. But then you also have Shirase, who is a more serious, more meticulous character. And this was originally her trip, but this could be a really bad thing. And that's not something that anyone else is voicing. And I thought it was interesting that Hinata recognizes the reluctance in Shirase's tone. And immediately, she doesn't want to go through the meticulous process of like feeling like a burden, right?
Yes.
So she immediately tells Shirase, you know what? Cut me loose. Like, you don't have to deal with me. Like, it was my mistake. And that makes Shirase like reevaluate like the importance of her friendship with Hinata. And I just thought it was so great how it played out, because there was no outward fight. And a lot of it was like, it is how we deal with relationships in our real lives, which is something happens and we don't immediately know what to say. So we're trying our best to read the emotions on our friends' faces, read the vibes in the room.
The entire episode was like a struggle to come to terms with some of their own flaws, but also understand like how each character's flaws organically result in tension between the other person. Because I think that Hinata and Shirase get a lot of screen time together just because of how different they are. I'm not going to call them character foils, but like they have traits that naturally conflict with each other.
Yeah.
And so, you know, they have this exchange on the hotel bed where they're just like they have a back and forth with their backs towards each other. You know, that's always symbolic in anime of them not being on the same page. And I really like, as I said, like this show searches for cathartic moments. So the next day at the airport, I actually got really emotional at this scene.
Me too.
When when Shirase like slams the money down on the counter. She's like demanding later plane tickets. And Hinata's issue, because you think that she's the wise one, the smart one.
Yeah.
But I think that her logicalness and her pride gets in the way when she's trying to interact with someone who's as stubborn as Shirase. But it's Hinata's failure to realize that Shirase's priorities have changed. Like, it's no longer about getting to Antarctica, but it's more about preserving this relationship that she's developed with the other girls. And so that was really nice to see.
Yeah.
Now about Shirase, I love that they make her stubbornness a thing to be proud of, I guess. Like, it's a good trait for her, even though traditionally stubbornness is usually seen as a bad thing, because I think that there's this whole idea of perseverance, and they almost equate stubbornness, her stubbornness at least, to perseverance, right? Like, there's all of this talk about how they're never gonna get there. Shirase's goal is to like prove everybody wrong, and now she's wielding that to prove to her friends, like, I want you with me, I'm gonna take you with me, like, no matter what.
Episode the journey continues. They get to the ship. There's a scene where Todo is talking, I believe she's talking to Shirase. She's kind of talking about like actually recounting what happened with Takako. And so like this is, I think, the first time that we really learn how Takako died and everything. And the way that her death obviously had an emotional impact on everyone involved, but also like publicly what it meant for the expedition, like, and having all these sponsors and all this compensation to now nobody wanted to be involved with it because of the civilian death, and how it made that dream to go back even harder. I love what Todo says about the ship itself and sort of what it represents, saying some of us won't have anything waiting when we come back, but we're all here. That's the kind of ship this is. And so it kind of goes back to that feeling of the ship being a symbol for yearning and adventure, and being like, even though you have a dream and you can't really describe it, the ship and the journey itself is like representative of what it means to like chase something that might be really, really hard to attain. And so I think the show is actually full of a lot of these reflective moments where every episode they really are trying to tell a mini story, almost like tell one little chunk of these people's lives. And they manage to do it in these like very self-contained ways, almost like it almost feels like every episode has this like moment of reflection, this moment of catharsis.
On a shallow surface level, you hear about these scientific things and these policy things, and they all make sense, right? But they don't carry any weight. But this show does a really good job of painting the emotional picture of like the people's lives underneath those, and how even though the policy is this, that serves to spur these people on even more. It spurs on their conviction of getting there. And so it does a really good job of showing the emotions behind that.
All right. So let's move on to episode 9. The story is called Antarctic Love Story. And I remember when I read the episode title, I was like, who's falling in love? I was like, I thought this was a show about friendship.
Or the cold open when the guy goes up to her and he's like, I'm in love. And I was like, what? Excuse me?
Who are you? So there's this, the episode like opens up with that guy saying that he's in love and he has a crush on Todo. And I was like, you and me both, okay? Get in line. I like that. I like that they start building up this pseudo maternal relationship between.
Stop! I literally wrote that same set of words in my notes. Pseudo maternal relationship. We are truly on the same wavelength today.
This is the result of having had like every English class with you.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Like, we've literally ascended into telepathy. We've literally ascended.
I wrote the same thing in the same episode.
Yeah. Continue. Okay, yes. So, pseudo-maternal. Pseudo-maternal relationship between Shirase and Todo. And it's interesting because we get flashbacks of Takako, Shirase's mom, and it almost seems like personality-wise, Todo and Shirase are a lot more similar than Shirase and her mom. And so when you have these two people who are like both very similar, like in terms of their demeanor.
And tsundere.
Yeah, they're literally both tsundere. Adult tsundere and baby tsundere. Maybe that's why I like them so much. It's just like you can neither of them are characters who are very expressive about their feelings, and so but at the same time you can feel the tension and the grief that sits between these two specifically.
And they have this moment in this episode where Todo almost like confronts Shirase about how like just kind of like a check-in, you know, like what's going on, like what do you think about her mother, which took her a lot to get there because I think Todo also was very averse to talking about feelings. But I think it was really poignant how Shirase was just saying like, I have no idea how I feel, right? Like she has all these unresolved emotions that she doesn't like she doesn't know who to blame. She doesn't know what to be sad about. She doesn't know how to deal with it. Like she says, I don't blame you, but you know that she doesn't even know like what's going on. Like she doesn't know who to blame. And so she goes on to talk a little bit about how after the news of her mother's death, Shirase just kind of lived life, like continued living, because in her mind that has denied this thing that has happened, she subconsciously was continuing to expect her mother to return, which is so sad. Like that is so painful. And I think that at this point in the show, I think that the name of the show is poignant because a place further than the universe, it's like, oh yeah, Antarctica because it's far. But I also think that you can equate it to death, because death is the place that is further than the universe. Nobody has ever gone there, come back and told us about it, you know?
So yeah, episode 10 to 13, I feel like this is kind of when everyone's character threads are getting wrapped up. Yes. This next one is called Partial Friendship, and it's Yuzuki focused, I guess. She, I guess, is like realizing that this journey is gonna come to an end soon. And after that, she is gonna get right back into having to film a drama and like, you know, famous people things. Like she's gonna be busy. So she is quite insecure about the fate of her friendships with these girls, because like who knows when she'll ever see them again. And I think it's really important to remember that Yuzuki is the youngest here, but she has this air to her where she doesn't want to seem like she's the youngest, I think. So she writes this friendship contract to make the girls promise, I guess, that like they won't drift apart and that they'll still hang out with her. And I think it was very interesting that Kimari, her reaction is that she cries when she sees it and then becomes a little bit distant and doesn't really want to talk about it right away. I really sympathized with Yuzuki's desire to hold on to this sense of real friendship, and it would make sense that Kimari would be quite hurt at the idea that Yuzuki doesn't already think that they are friends. And again, it goes back to that whole thing of like, when you have different types of personalities and when you necessarily like talk about things or like check in on how people are feeling, one person might think everything is fine, another person might be feeling insecure. And when you don't properly unpack those feelings, this is the sort of thing that happens. You have this falling out where no one's really fighting, but clearly there's some tension in the room.
And so they touch on how like nebulous the idea of friendship is, because it's not like a spousal relationship or a parental relationship where it's like, okay, you are from my womb, you are my daughter, I will now disown you as my daughter, let's date, let's break up. But friendship is sometimes more like, it's a lot more abstract, and I think that that's what the show is trying to touch on. And it's interesting because I actually sympathized more with Kimari, which is just interesting. And I really liked her little monologue when she goes into Yuzu's room and she talks about her friendship with Megumi, right? Which we talked about earlier. And I got really emotional when she was talking about she was like showing her text messages with Megumi and how like Megumi just like leaves her unread all the time, but she still continues to text, right? But I think that when you truly trust somebody, it like all those things don't really matter anymore. And that's what Kimari was trying to get across to Yuzu. Like, I want you to know that for me at least, I hold my friends to a high level of trust, and I trust you, right?
Yeah, I think it's a great scene. I think it's so interesting that we've connected with different characters, because I feel like when I was watching the show, I was obviously like I loved like all the girls, but I think the episodes that were like the most impactful for me were the ones that were like focused on Yuzuki and focused on Shirase, like the more introverted characters, because like as someone who is just very introverted, I know I don't seem very introverted, like people tell me all the time, but like I am very introverted. It takes me so much energy to send a single text message. And like as someone who's like extremely insecure about literally every relationship in my life, Like, I just, like, related so much to this particular conflict, to the Megami episode as well, because, like you were saying, the show was really asking us, what is friendship? Like, philosophically, right? And the thing that Shirase and Hinata are trying to explain to Yuzuki, who is still very immature, right? She's like, she's younger than them. She hasn't had any friends before, is that there's no real definition of it. And, like, friendships are the most complicated relationships I think we can have in our lives. The depth of, like, storytelling that these kinds of relationships get in media is significantly less than romantic relationships. So
I agree. Cool. We can talk about episode 11 now.
Yes.
Which is Hinata's episode. Let's see. Okay, so the thing I noticed about these last few episodes is that, with the exception of episode 12, they really hammer in the importance of communal problem solving, because a lot of the girls' issues stem from the fact that they just don't communicate with each other about their problems. They're hiding things. And so the structure of the episodes is like, something disconcerting comes up, and then the whole episode is like trying to unravel the nuances of that problem until it culminates in this like really emotionally cathartic moment at the end. And so kind of the same structure here. They're talking to some people back home, I guess. And Hinata like gets this message from some of her quote unquote friends, but she like has this like visceral reaction to them. And so Shirase's like, okay, what the heck is going on? We find out that Hinata's had this falling out with some of her teammates, track and field teammates, I believe.
When I was watching the episode, one of the things I felt was that it was like retreading some of the same themes between the two that we got in the passport episode. But for me, it was just kind of like, okay, yeah, like her senpais are clout chasers, whatever. But it did feel more dramatic than it needed to be. But I think that's just a completely personal thing. It wasn't like super emotionally impactful as the rest of the episodes, only because a lot of these episodes are like very emotionally impactful. So for this one, I was just kind of like, okay, it happened. It's there.
That's true. A lot of these things we've already seen in the Singapore episode.
Yeah. Okay, so episode 12, guys.
Episode 12 messed me up.
This one left me traumatized. This is the episode that I think the show has been building towards, which is really finally unraveling everything related to Shirase and her relationship with her mom. I think it's interesting that this show starts with touching upon this idea of Shirase becoming disillusioned about the trip, and specifically at the prospect of it ending, because ever since her mom died, she's had this goal of seeing Antarctica and, you know, the place where her mom visited as like the thing to chase. And now that it's almost ending, what is there left for her, and like what is there left to keep her afloat? And so she really has to confront her grief and reckon with her pain in a way that she almost has, or, you know, she's definitely been denying ever since it happened. And then she has this conversation with Todo, who says, I latched on to the idea that Takuko wanted me to come. I really liked this quote because I think it really shows how much, like, when we're dealing with emotions as complicated and as visceral as grief and death, we as human beings don't know what to do. And so what we do is we create things for us to hold on to, you know, we create meaningful things, whether or not they're real. And so for Takuko, or for Todo, that is clinging to this idea that, you know, if Takuko were here and, you know, if this were to happen, like Takuko would want me to come back for her. And I think that's the same thing that Shirase realizes, which is she came because she created this idea of significance and importance for herself. And now that it's ending, she really has to deal with that. And by the end of the episode, she kind of realizes that, she talks to Kimari about it. And Kimari kind of says that she came to Antarctica because she wanted an adventure, but now that she's here, the purpose and the goal and the importance of the journey was that she came here and made memories with her friends. And that kind of reframes the purpose of the journey for Shirase as well, because she realizes that it is about finding closure with her mom, but it's also about being able to make friends and memories. And just to come back to what I said earlier about creating motifs in the show, ma'am, the emails. Ma'am, the emails.
I cried so hard.
I think it is so effective what they did with this idea of Shirase over the years sending these blank emails to her mom's email address. And then the moment that they find her mom's old laptop, and Shirase opens the laptop and she sees the flood of emails coming into her mom's inbox, was so cathartic. And she is like, why am I about to cry? She's like sobbing.
So sad.
And then the girls are outside sobbing. I was like, hello? I didn't ask for this. That's what makes an effective motif, right? Like the idea of a motif is that we see it and we're like, that means something. And then every single time we see it, there's a new layer of meaning to it. And I just think that the way that they were able to achieve the emotional payoff of this character arc was so earned. And I was sobbing. So I think that's saying something, because it wasn't like I was, oh, my eyes are watering and there's tears. I was like
ugly crying.
Dry.
Yeah, me too. Didn't we call to plan this episode?
Yeah,
after?
and then we had our prep call like half an hour later, and I was like, just to let you know,
I'm a little bit raw
fragile
right now. I think that can really also be seen when we see Shirase's like pure like her hesitancy in wanting to go, because if she goes, that means, and she knows fully well that her illusion will now be shattered, or at least there's a potential of shattering it. And the other girls are scurrying around the place trying to find something, and she's telling them like, guys, like,
it's
give
okay.
up, there's nothing here, I'm okay with it. But you can see how that is a manifestation of her not wanting to find anything. Yeah. And I think that the way the highly cathartic scene was executed was also very nice. Just like by herself in her dark room and just seeing those emails come up. I think that was very lonely and melancholy.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to cry so much, but I did. And it hurt.
I know.
It was painful.
I know. Luckily, we have episode 13,
yes.
which is a little bit...
our actual finale.
More lighthearted.
Yeah.
The denouement episode, definitely. It reinstates the tone of the show as being generally hopeful. This is kind of a personal note, but you remember when I took that trip to Iceland?
Yes.
I think... Well, okay. If you'll allow me, I would like to talk a little bit about Antarctica.
Yes.
Because I think that, as you said, it isn't that big of a deal all through the show until you get there. And so I just got really emotional looking at some of the scenes of the landscape, because it does really look similar to like Iceland. I took a trip to Iceland 2 summers ago, and it was just really nice. As we mentioned before, there's something about... like vast landscapes and the glory and grandeur of nature that humbles you and that allows certain emotions to surface. And I think this show gives a lot of like banger thesis statements. Like they just tell you what's up. Part of Shirase's farewell speech at the end. So she says, Antarctica is a place that strips everything bare. Time, life, hearts. It's a place with nothing to protect you and nowhere to hide. It's an environment that exposes everything we're embarrassed about and everything we want to hide. And so, naked and crying, we're forced to come face to face with who we really are. Like, is this a 16-year-old girl? Or is this a philosopher? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I like that throughout the whole show, they're constantly posing this question of why these people want to go to Antarctica. Why does the expedition crew want to go? Why do the girls want to go? And whenever it comes up, they always describe Antarctica as being this completely unforgiving place. But yeah, I really like that all of that culminates in the last few episodes. Like, they finally make it, and boy, is it worth it, because the animation, while it probably doesn't do the real thing justice, animation still is able to bring out the beautiful in things. And so I think the animation does capture, at least in essence, some of the things that people should go to Iceland and Antarctica to see, because it's really breathtaking.
I think Antarctica as a choice for this setting of the story was very effective. And the speech that you brought up, that is what I call a writer's room speech. I feel like every show has one. And I love writer's room speeches, because I think, to me, like, as someone who writes a lot, I think it's the time for the writer to be like, okay, I've earned this. Sometimes some shows don't earn their writer's room speech. Some shows do not. Some shows just like go in and they launch their whole like thematic thesis statement. But for it to be impactful, it has to have been built up in an effective way. And I think the show definitely earned theirs. I love that the episode title is "We'll Go on Another Journey Someday." I think that is so cute. Okay. I think that like it really like cements that theme of hopefulness that you really seek out for these types of shows.
Yeah. It's just particularly hard to watch in quarantine.
Oh, it's the worst. Yeah, don't watch it now, but put it on your list. The next segment that we usually do on the pod is called the Bechdel test, where we do the Bechdel test. But today, obviously it passes, so there's not much else to say there, but we're going to open up this discussion, I guess, to talk a little bit more about female representation in anime as a whole. I guess how this show situates itself in that realm, and just our thoughts and feelings about, watching an anime that is very female focused.
Like, I came in knowing that it was going to be an all-female cast for the most part, and that it was, I'm sure it was going to be very empowering. But I don't think it really hit until the end of episode 2, where they're having this chase scene through the red light district. Right? It's this idea of being in motion, and so they're literally running through urban Tokyo at night. There was something particularly freeing about that and emotional about seeing that, because I think that it was at that moment that I realized that I always see these kinds of scenes with young boys, right? And so it was just so refreshing to see such a story being told from the perspective of 4 high school girls. And even though the main cast is comprised of all girls, at no point ever does it feel like any of the 4 main girls are being used in some way to forward a particular narrative agenda. It's just so clearly a story and a case study about these 4 girls, their lives, and what they go through, which is so, you see that so often for young boys in shounen anime sometimes.
Yeah, it's necessary to have stories that are explicitly about female empowerment. Like, we need those kinds of stories. I think there is a place for them. You see a lot in media. Like, the expectation is like, okay, you always have to have some kind of message. And I like that the show doesn't necessarily focus on having any kind of message related to being a girl and like the struggles of it. It really isn't about that at all. And I think there's a really funny scene that happens. I can't remember. It's in the start of the show, where they want to go to the information session. I think it's the same episode, episode 2. They want to go to the Antarctica like info session, but they can't because like they're too young to go. Like, they're not initially allowed to. And so they have this like funny scene where they're like, okay, someone go seduce one of the male expeditioners. And I like that the scene is like treated as like comedy. It's treated as a complete joke. Like, it is undeniably part of like the way that the female experience is portrayed in media a lot, but they're making light of it, and I thought that was really, really nice.
It reminds me of why I love Little Women, the book and also the movie. So if nobody's ever seen the latest adaptation by Greta Gerwig, it is one of my favorite movies right now. And I distinctly remember an interview that with Greta, and she was talking about how she really made it's important to emphasize sound in the movie so that she could create this symphony of sound in the girls' household of the girls laughing and slamming doors and cooking in the kitchen. And I think that in some ways they do this also in A Place Further Than the Universe, because there's so many like there's never a dull moment with the girls, you know. They're always laughing about something, pranking each other, being scared over something, and it's always in this like high-pitched giggly voice, you know. But I think that's part of the appeal, because there has been something historically about how women should be, you know, sit nice and pretty and quiet, and to see something like a work that portrays females and women as loud and boisterous and just being themselves freely without any restraint is refreshing to see and very encouraging as well.
And I also was thinking, like, how would this show feel different if it like was about, like, if it followed a cast of boys? Because I think what we had mentioned in our Cowboy Bebop episode was that there are some stories or experiences or emotions that you can really only portray through the female experience. And I do think that the adventure story would feel different if it was following a cast of boys. And I think sometimes when people think about like, oh, like what makes a good story is like, oh, it doesn't matter like if it follows boys or girls or whatever ethnicity or, you know, whatever. But I do think that it does matter a little bit. Like, growing up, like thinking that, seeing that most of the popular anime out there, or most of the anime that was being made, was catered towards that shonen little boy audience. It does kind of like, even though I can enjoy it, it's hard to sometimes fully connect, because you're always like, oh, this is a good character for a show, or a good female character for a shonen, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's nice to just kind of watch a show and be like, this is just great. It's just nice female character writing, you know? And girls aren't being regulated to whatever archetype.
I agree. And it's one thing to say that everybody is equal, but it's a different thing to say that everybody's the same. And I think it's potentially harmful when we do treat everybody the same. Every community has different experiences.
Exactly.
And we can't pretend that they don't, you know?
There's an interesting lack of male characters as a whole in the show. But it's not
feels
like
intentional though.
Yeah, definitely intentional. And it's not like, oh, there's like no men in the show or whatever. It's more just like they're there, but similar to how female characters get treated in other shows, they're just in the background. They don't really play any particular role, and it's not like they're absent from the story, but the story's not focused on them, which I just appreciated.
I think one of my critiques, though, is that it doesn't seem really realistic. And I say that because, like, how do they go to Antarctica with so little obstacles? And also, like, it's based on the present reality. Expeditions like that are usually manned by more men. Like, you don't typically see that much women leadership and empowerment on the crew of scientific expeditions, which is the present reality, unfortunately. I'm not going to use it to bash the show, though, because I don't think that's the reality is not what the show is trying to encapsulate.
Definitely not. No.
But yeah, it was a little bit of, oh, so that was so easy for you, eh? Interesting. I could never. Because if the show is serving to inspire, right?
Yes.
You might want to add in a little realism. But, I mean, it's a fine line.
Yeah,
so
it is a fine line. And I think, like, again, there's nothing wrong with wanting to write a story that's supposed to, like, it's supposed to very closely resemble, like, slice of life, contemporary in our real world. But to write that world a little bit more aspirationally than our real world. Like, I think that's totally fine. I don't think every piece of media that is like that sets out to be a contemporary has to like, you know, stick to our real world standards like so closely, because I think there is value in writing aspirationally and being like, maybe the commander of the expedition is a woman and maybe everyone around her is a woman. Exactly. What's wrong with that? Like, maybe it's not realistic right now, but like, who cares? Like, it's it didn't detract from the show for sure.
I want a shonen with a
girl. I know.
I want a shonen with a female protagonist, which I can think already. Like maybe Soul Eater was a good example.
Yeah,
I know we talked about
Soul
it
Eater
before.
was one of a kind. I suppose.
And then what else?
Let's look it up right now. To be honest, not all of these look like shonen, like in the way that like Soul Eater is a shonen, in the way that Hero Aka is a shonen. We're using the word shonen as this like placeholder word for so many like mini genres and tropes, because shonen is just the name of the demographic, but like it's kind of encompassed more than that. Like, if you don't want to call it a shonen, like, why can't there just be a show that's just like an action adventure? That's like maybe fantastical or not, maybe an urban fantasy or whatever, that's just has a female protagonist. Like,
maybe we'll write it.
An idea, a thought.
Hey, Kris, what do you think about starting an anime with me?
Oh my God.
At 8 p.m.
Neither of us can draw. That's the problem.
Michelle!
Yeah, oh my gosh. Help. Michelle did our
shout out
artwork.
Michelle for our new artwork.
Thank you.
Love it. We love it.
We actually love it. She should be our artist for our shonen anime.
For our shonen
that we're gonna
anime.
write.
All right, so for our next segment, we're going to do Dumpster Fire, which is the segment that we do when we are tired of life. Just kidding. When we are...
we?
We're just...
Are we kidding?
We could talk about whatever we want about the show that we just talked about, anything we missed, anything we love, anything we hate. So one of the things that we talked about prior to recording that we wanted to cover is voice actors. So I didn't do any research into any of the voice actresses or actors.
Yep.
So Kris today is going to hopefully pleasantly surprise me with what she's uncovered.
Okay, so the reason I went... Okay, oftentimes I do go down the VA rabbit hole these days, just because when you start watching a lot of anime, you start hearing voices and you're like, where is that person from? Okay, actually, I'm going to start with Shirase's voice actor.
Ooh, okay.
Because this was one that I didn't necessarily feel like was familiar, but when I found out who it was, I was like, oh my gosh. So her voice actor is Kana Hanazawa. She's done so many things, but I think she's probably widely known for voicing the character of Nadeko from the Monogatari series, who sings the Renai Circulation opening.
Wait, hold on.
So she
sang
sings
Renai. Shirase sings Renai Circulation.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, that one with the high pitched voice. Whoa.
So that is like the ultimate uwu anime girl song, which I thought was really interesting, because I feel like that song has kind of transcended now.
Definitely.
Like that OP ended up blowing up over the years, and it's like so popular now.
It's so uwu.
And it's like so uwu, and like it was one of my favorite songs as a kid. And so when I found out that she voiced Nadeko and sang that song, I was like dying on the floor.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Because her voice as Shirase is lower.
It's
definitely.
lower, yeah. And that song is like so bubblegummy. She has like a lot of like random voice roles. She's also Red Blood Cell in Zelda work, which I thought was funny.
Gosh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love Red Blood Cell.
I love her. Okay, so Yuzuki's VA, Hayami Saori. So, okay, the reason that like I freaked out was because she voiced, this is not relevant to you, but she voices
someone from Naruto, probably.
Uzumaki Himawari.
I was like, Naruto.
She voices Himawari, who is Naruto's daughter. And
I know
she
her.
has.
I know her.
Has-
We go back. we go way back.
So, like, obviously, as like a longtime Naruto fan, she is
Right.
also my daughter.
Yuzuki's your daughter.
Yuzuki's my daughter. So every time Yuzuki spoke, I was like, Himawari, my daughter.
Yeah.
She also voices the main girl from A Silent Voice, Nishimiya. Yeah.
Wait, really?
Yeah, but Nishimiya is
deaf
like
girl?
a deaf character, so she doesn't have many speaking lines.
Yeah, but I always did admire the way the voice actress did her voice.
Yeah.
Because it's difficult to emanate the voice of somebody who can't hear, you know? Like,
Yeah,
that's a
exactly.
very hard concept to wrap your mind around as somebody who can hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting because, like, yeah, that's probably a hard role to play. Now that we're done with the VAs, I thought it would be fun to bring back a segment that hasn't been relevant for a while, which is guessing each other's favorite character.
This is like the most low IQ segment ever, but we like love this segment.
I love it.
Why don't you guess mine first? Because I
Okay,
feel
okay.
like I have. Okay, no justification. No
Don't
clues.
give me any hint.
Yeah.
Okay. So, given your track record, your favorite character has to be
Oh.
Kimari.
Yay!
Okay. That should be an easy one.
Why?
Just because I feel like you like those kinds of characters. Like, I feel like there is, like, you know what? Like, I just think
You just have a feeling.
you just have a feeling like when I started
We're just
watching her,
telepathic.
when I was watching the first episode, I was like, this is an Emily character. This just feels like an Emily character. Like, this
Right.
feels like someone you would, like, die for, you know?
Right.
Which,
right,
like,
right.
I can definitely attest to that. Like, I would die for her.
I think that I do, as I'm growing in maturity,
What was that voice?
as I'm growing, I find
Yeah.
that I'm being attracted towards characters that are the more optimistic and like bubbly, wholesome protagonist type.
Yeah.
I didn't used to be like that. Like for me, my childhood was Kingdom Hearts, right? And I used to be like, Sora again? Because Sora is this like very character that's very driven. He's like your aspirational
Right.
protagonist, right? He believes in the power of friendship. And I was like, really? This again, Sora? But I feel like as I grow older, I'm more appreciative of optimistic characters. I feel her, you know? So
I feel
we're on
her
the same
energy.
level.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. I'm conflicted because I remember you texting me being like, I would die for Kimari. Like,
Oh, yeah.
right? I remember you texting me that. But as I've learned on this podcast, we can't use earlier precedent to decide because
No, I'm kind of
sometimes
all
it's
over the place.
misleading.
I'm kind of all over the place.
Oh, yeah? But just from the personal connection, I'll guess Yuzuki because you said you really connected with her.
Yeah, you got it right.
story.
You got it right. I was like worried that you wouldn't get it because I was like, okay, given my track record, she should pick maybe Shirase because
Right,
like she's a
yeah.
little bit more like explicitly tsundere and like
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
but-
why Yuzuki over Shirase?
I think I found her lack of emotional intelligence really
Yeah.
endearing. Like, I think Kimari is endearing in this way that she's like so cute, but I think there's something about Yuzuki that is quite awkward. And I think that awkwardness was like something that I really resonated with. Like, I felt like if I was any one of the girls as like when I was younger, I would definitely be Yuzuki because she's just so awkward and like doesn't really know how to express herself. And I think I was definitely like that when I was younger. So
The interesting thing about Yuzuki, though, is that she very much seems like the type AB character where she is a celebrity. So when it's her duty to do so, to perform, she's the most
Right.
natural one out of all of them.
right, if she like has to do it, yeah.
But in real life, she does have that awkwardness to her. And I think that even though I agree you do have an awkwardness, but I think that
I'm glad we're on the same page.
I also think that when it comes down to it, you can be very eloquent or professional or whatever you want to call it when it's called for.
Yeah.
So yeah, I see it.
Sometimes you just like learn like fake it till you make it. So definitely resonated with that.
Yeah.
Wow, we got each other's faves. Okay, but like obviously just like on a dumpster fire note, my second favorite character in the show is Captain Toto.
I like that she does have the boss vibes, but she's also soft, which I know is your downfall. I know that you are soft for characters that are like, ooh, I'm all that. And then turn around, they're like, ooh, I'm shy. And Chris is like, yes, give me more. I know you. So let's wrap it up right now with our ratings.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to rate it.
Mm-hmm.
This might seem high.
Just go with your gut.
4.5 out of 5.
Okay.
Face sunburns.
Nice.
From the Antarctic sun.
Yes.
Not just any sun. Mm-hmm. Although it's the same sun. Anyways. Yes, I would give it a 4.5.
Okay.
Because I think that there is some suspension of belief to be seen or to be had, because, you know, they are trying to go somewhere with the tone of the series. But I want to rate it really high because I think that on a personal level, I had such an easy time connecting to the characters. And I felt like a lot of the lessons were so relevant to my own life that it just made me all the more emotional. And so instead of nostalgia playing a role this time, I'm going to say it's the emotional manipulation of the show on my heart that played a role.
I am going to rate the show 4 out of 5.
Okay.
Passports that you lose in Singapore and then find
your friend's purse
like a day later in your friend's purse.
Yeah.
I think for me to give a show a 5, it has to leave me like floored, you know? Like there has to be something about it that like it has to feel special to me on a level that's more than just like, did it execute its storytelling well?
Yeah,
you know?
I agree.
But with that said, like, you know, it's a 4. Like, it's an amazing show. Like, there is really something to be said about a show that can make you tear up every episode, that can make you, like, feel endeared to a cast of characters in such a short amount of time. And, like, it's the type of show that can very much fall into melodrama if not done well. So the fact that they were able to kind of take these, like, universal themes of like interpersonal relationships and like show it in a way that's not novel or groundbreaking, but just genuinely impactful and human, does warrant a very high rating.
So that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for sticking with us all the way. We know it wasn't easy. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube at The Workshop, Twitter at Into The Workshop, Spotify at The Workshop. I'll get this right one day. Until then, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.